At Shir Hadash, we've begun a Mincha Maariv every afternoon. This week, we begin at 4:35 Mincha, and then there's a short Shir, and then Maariv at 5:10 or so. Yesterday's talk, unfortunately, did not record for people who want to follow along at home, so I'm re-recording it here now for those who are interested. I've been learning a different shirim each day. I've been learning the letters of the alphabet as they appear in the Mishnah. So yesterday's, our first day, was Ot Aleph, and this comes from the Mishnah in Berachot, chapter 5, Parakeh, Mishnah Aleph, and it begins, Ein omdim likparel el mitok kavod rosh, that a person should not get ready to pray unless they do so from a serious position, from Kovod Rosh, seriousness, awe of God. The Mishnah goes on to say, Chasidim harishonim hayu shoim sha'achat mitpalelim, that the early Chasidim would wait a full hour before they would actually begin to pray in order to get in the proper mood, kedei sheikivinu et libam l'makom, so that they could properly direct their hearts in the right place, in the right way, to do the tefillah. It's very much in line with the Rambam. The Rambam in his Parish Mishnah quotes this, Ein omdim likparel el mitok kovod rosh, that you should be serious in your standing before prayer, and your kavanah should be with yira, with fear, with awe. As it said, Ivdu et Hashem b'yira, that you shall serve Hashem with fear and awe. And the Parish, according to the Rambam, is that you should wait before you start to pray until you've sort of collected all your thoughts and you are truly 100% fully prepared for his understanding. You should remove any extraneous thoughts. You should develop greater philosophical perspectives. You should have chachma when you're about to go and pray. Others are less intellectual about it, and they focus more on the awe one has to have and the fear one should have of Hashem before they're about to pray. The Mishnah itself goes on and suggests you should be so much in awe that even if there was a snake that wrapped around your leg, you would not interrupt yourself, nor even if the king came to you and asked how you were doing, you would not return because you were so focused on speaking to the Melech HaMelechim, the King of all kings, Hashem. So I want to develop this idea of the fear that one is meant to have, although just as a quick caveat, I should point out that the Rambam explains sort of the statement that the Mishnah makes, that even if a snake were wrapped around your leg, or even if a king came and spoke to you, he explains it a little bit to mitigate the difficulties in trying to understand that. I mean, really, if you're praying and there's a snake wrapped around your leg, you're not going to stop. So he says, first of all, we're talking about when you know that snake is usually not to bite and certainly not poisonous, then in theory you should be able to continue. I don't know how easy that is, but perhaps in the old days, if you were a farmer and you were very familiar with snakes and you saw that this was not dangerous, you were able to move forward without it distracting you. But if it were a dangerous viper or a scorpion, by all means, then you stop praying and you make sure to get rid of it because of any suffix of pikuach nefesh, any possibility that you might lose your life, takes precedence over these other matters. He also says something with regards to the king. He says we're only referring to a king that is not Jewish. A Jewish king. He says as follows: Lo yeshiv shalom lemelech ke sheyishal b'shlomo. When the king asks for how you're doing, im haya melech memamlechei Yisrael. If he was a Jewish king, a king from the Israel, you don't respond to him. But if he is from one of the kings of the nations of the world, then you would stop your tefillah for him. Because this also is endangering your life. I actually experienced something similar on some level to this understanding that the Jewish kings are somehow different. My guess is that Jewish kings, perhaps there's a greater closeness, and so therefore we should not be as fearful in terms of not responding, or perhaps a greater awareness that we're davening to Hashem, and therefore they understand that, why we can't respond. This particular point that I just mentioned, I had a somewhat similar experience with the Prime Minister of Israel. A number of years ago, we were fortunate to be at a person's home who was hosting the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and it was a Shabbat dinner or a Chag dinner, and delightful dinner. Politics was off the table. We're not allowed to speak about politics, but Bibi is very fascinating and delightful conversationalist. Spoke about so many different things, so well read. He was talking, I think, about Mark Twain and Sigmund Freud when they met in Vienna. In any event, the kids at the table go to wash their hands before making the blessing over challah. And as they're coming back, the Prime Minister is trying to make small talk with them and asking them how school, what soccer teams do they like, what positions do they like to play, and they've just washed their hands. And of course, once you wash your hands preparing to make the blessing over the challah, you do not speak until the blessing is made and you've eaten bread. So you see these kids, they look to their parents somewhat confused, like, what do we do? On one hand, we're being asked by the Prime Minister of Israel questions. It's not polite not to respond. Perhaps he has a din of being a king. On the other hand, they have the mitzvah of not speaking after washing their hands, to remain in that purity. So they're looking at their kids, and who comes and saves the day is Sarah Netanyahu. She's sitting next to her husband, and she sort of gives him a slap on the shoulder and tells him, what you forgot, they just washed their hands, leave them alone, they can't talk, because he kept, sort of repeating the questions because no one was responding. They were just giving him weird looks. But Sarah remembers or figured out what was going on. Perhaps Bibi knew as well, but he had forgotten, or maybe he didn't know. Whatever the case may be, there's clearly a distinction between a Jewish leader and a non-Jewish leader. The Jewish leader, someone's going to be there to remind him that you can't interrupt yourself when you can't interrupt when you're praying. So therefore, there's not the obligation to interrupt. But the king of the nations of the world who wouldn't know this, maybe then there is. Returning to this concept of yira in tefillah, elsewhere in the Mishnah, it writes that it's an incredibly important principle, and the Shechina, that the Shekhinah cannot reside when someone is having a light head, when not being serious. This is from the Midrash Tehillim, to teach us she'ein Shekhinah shora lo mitoch atzavut, not from the Shekhinah cannot reside in a person who is sad, lo mitoch atzelut, lo mitoch schok, not from a place of laughter, not from a place of sort of jovialness and less not seriousness, lo mitoch kalot rosh, lo mitoch sicha, not a place of like idle chatter, lo mitoch dvarim te'elim, and not from a place where people are just gossiping or wasting time. God doesn't abide in such a place, and therefore our tefillah has to be with koved rosh, with seriousness. The source of this is most likely the Gemara in Berachot, Lamed Aleph, and it asks, where do we learn that it has to be done with koved rosh? So Rabbi Eliezer offers the possibility. Maybe we learn it from the phrase "V'hi marat nefesh." This is with regards to Chana. When Chana prays that she wants to have a child who ultimately becomes Shmuel, and the Kohen Eli sees her and thinks she's drunk and she's a bitter spirit, the Gemara says we learned so many halachot of how to pray from Chana, that she was such a bitter spirit and pain, and she had such awe and fear at that moment of tefillah. Maybe we should learn from that. But the Gemara rejects this idea. It says, how can you learn from Chana? Like, not everyone's in the same pain that she is. So we have to learn a different source. They say, maybe we learn it from David HaMelech. He says, Vani b'rov chastecha avo beitecha ashtachave el heicha kachecha b'yiratecha. And I will come to your place. We're supposed to daven as if we're in the Beit HaMikdash. As David says, he would come to, on the Beit HaMikdash, but come to his heichal, his temple, and I would bow down el heicha kachecha, your holy place, b'yiratecha, right, with fear and awe. But the Gemara rejects that idea as well. It says, maybe we all can't be like David and Melech. David and Melech was also of a bitter spirit. He was trying to do tshuva of his sin with Bathsheba. So therefore, not everyone will be of that same state of mind that David has in terms of approaching God with tefillah from such a serious point of view. He had to do tshuva, so that's why he prayed with such kavanah. Throws out other possible ideas of where maybe we learned it from. There's a line, for example, when it says, "Ishtachvu Hashem," that you should bow down to Hashem, the Hadrat Kodesh, in the Hadar, the glory, the beauty of holiness. Al Tikre, don't read it, the Hadrat, in glory or beauty. Ela b'charadat, in shakiness. Charada, in trembling. Maybe that's where we learn that you should serve God and pray to God with fear and awe. The Gemara was not really clear about that. It says maybe you should read it as it actually says it, Hadar, glory or beauty. And from here, Rabbi Yehuda learns that you should dress nicely. You should wear your finest clothes when you're about to enter into tefillah. Maybe that's what you learn from that verse. Anyway, the Gemara has different ideas. Finally, it offers the suggestion that we learn it from Tehillim that says, Ivdu et Hashem b'yira, right? The Rambam had quoted that verse previously. Ivdu et Hashem b'yira b'gilu b're'idah, that you shall serve God in fear and awe, and when you rejoice, b'gilu, and when you rejoice, you should do so with trembling. So it's an interesting line. You should rejoice, but with trembling. The Gemara goes on and says that one in this world should never be filled with such joy that they don't also have the awareness, and not only the awareness, the awe and the trembling of standing before God. And the Gemara tells certain stories of how there would be senior rabbis who would give tochach, give reproof to other rabbis, and they would say, listen, you look too joyous. You're too overcome with joy. You shouldn't do that way. But in many of these instances, the junior rabbis responded and says, no. It's okay that I am filled with joy because I'm in the midst of mitzvah. For example, one of the cases is the rabbi was wearing tefillin. He says, no, I'm allowed to be joyous because I'm wearing tefillin. Tefillin is a protector for me. Engaged in mitzvah allows a person to be filled with joy, and one need not be concerned that they're going to be too joyous as a result. In fact, that's what one of the continuation of that Midrash Tehillim that I already quoted, that's a continuation. It says God will not reside, and the Shekhinah does not reside, not mitok schok, not from jovialness, v'lo mitok kalot rosh, and not lightheadedness, v'lo mitok sicha, not just idle banter, v'lo mitok dvarim telim, ela mitok dvar simcha shel mitzvah. But God does reside amongst us when one has the simcha of a mitzvah. When one is engaged in a mitzvah, then God indeed can engage in that regard. I want to just add one more thing as the Gemara continues, because I think it's relevant for those of us who are alive today, those of us who live in Israel, and those who connect their Jewish identity to Israel wherever they may be in the world. The Gemara goes on and tells the story of Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. He says, one is forbidden to fulfill his mouth with mirth in this world. So as long as we are in exile, because it's stated, and this is quoting from Shir that many of us are familiar with, as follows. So the Hebrew is as follows. Asor the Adam Shimalei Schok, right? A person is forbidden to fill his mouth with schok, with this mirth, this joyous experience, Be'olam hazeh, in this world. Shenemar, as it said in Shir Az Yimalei, then, Yimalei Schok Pino Ushonenu Vina. Then, meaning when we return to Israel, then that will be an opportunity to be joyous again. But barring that return, until such time, then you have no right to be joyous to such a degree. And as a result of that, he says for the rest of his life, Reish Lakish never was malei schok. He never had great joy because he took the word seriously that he was not allowed to have such joy until such time that we return to Israel. For those of us, of course, who have returned, or those who make Israel a big part of their Jewish identity, the joy then is permitted. That the experience of being here allows us to break that curse, as it were. Az Yimale, we're living in the times of the Az, of the then. And we should appreciate that opportunity and make sure to fill our lives with joy as a result of it.